The letters detail everything: court filing fees, legal representation costs, property seizure procedures, and auction timelines. According to their calculations, if this goes to court and we lose, we'll owe not just the $12,000 in back fees, but an additional $18,000 in legal costs and penalties. $30,000 total. For a cabin that's been in our family since before the HOA existed. Dad, maybe we should just pay the original amount, I say, hating myself for even suggesting it. $12,000 is a lot, but it's not worth losing everything over. Dad looks up from the letters with an expression I've never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something colder. More dangerous. Son, do you know what happens if we pay this? I shake my head. We legitimize their claim. We admit they have authority over our property. And next year, when they decide our cabin doesn't meet their community standards, when they want us to repaint it, or rebuild the deck, or tear down the garden where your mother's ashes are scattered, we'll have no legal standing to refuse. He's right, and I know it. This isn't about $12,000. This is about whether we own our property or just rent it from an HOA that didn't exist when we bought it. But knowing he's right doesn't make the next few weeks any easier. The HOA launches a full court press. They start sending notices to other property owners, warning them about the legal precedent our case could set. Suddenly, neighbors I've known my entire life are crossing the street to avoid talking to me. The mailman starts looking apologetic when he delivers our daily stack of legal correspondence. Your family is putting everyone's property values at risk, Mrs. Peterson from down the road tells me when I run into her at the grocery store. If you win this fight, what's to stop other people from ignoring HOA rules? The whole community could fall apart. I want to explain that we never agreed to any HOA rules in the first place, but she's already walking away. The HOA has done an impressive job of making us look like the villains in this story. The financial pressure gets worse. Dad starts calling lawyers, trying to find someone willing to take our case. The first three won't even consider it apparently. Fighting established HOAs is legal career suicide. The fourth lawyer, Johnson, no relation, agrees to meet with us, but wants a $5,000 retainer just to review our documents. $5,000 just to look at our paperwork? I'm incredulous. Dad, we don't have that kind of money lying around. I know, Dad says quietly, but that's exactly what they're counting on. They want us broke and desperate before we even get to court. We scraped together the retainer by borrowing against Dad's disability benefits. Johnson spends 2 weeks reviewing our case, then calls with his assessment. Mr. Johnson, I have to be honest with you, he says, and I can already hear the defeat in his voice. Your documentation is impressive, and you clearly have legitimate claims about the original property restrictions. But Brookstone, Martinez, and Associates are bringing in specialist HOA attorneys from the state capitol. They're treating this like a precedent-setting case, and they have unlimited funding from the HOA's Legal Reserve Fund. So you're saying we can't win? Dad asks. I'm saying the deck is stacked against individual property owners in these situations. The law favors established HOAs, and judges are reluctant to undermine community authority structures. My professional recommendation is to negotiate a settlement. Dad hangs up without another word. That night, I find him sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at those manila folders. For the first time since this started, he looks old, tired, maybe even defeated. Dad, maybe the lawyer's right. Maybe we should try to negotiate something. 37 years, he says without looking up. 37 years I've been preparing for this exact situation. Every document in these folders, every piece of research, every legal precedent I studied it was all leading to this moment. He looks up at me, and I see something I've never seen in my father's eyes before, doubt. What if I was wrong? What if being prepared isn't enough, when the other side has unlimited money and political connections? What if David really can't beat Goliath when Goliath can afford better lawyers? Dad, they're not just trying to take our cabin, son. They're trying to prove that people like us, people who don't have money or influence or political connections, don't have the right to fight back when powerful people decide they want something we own. The room falls quiet except for the tick of the kitchen clock. Outside, I can hear the sounds of our neighborhood settling in for the night. Normal people living normal lives, not fighting legal battles they can't afford against opponents they can't match. But then Dad straightens up in his wheelchair, and I see a spark of something familiar in his eyes. You know what, though? They made one crucial mistake. What's that? Dad smiles, and it's the first genuine smile I've seen from him in weeks. They assume that being right doesn't matter when the other side has more money. He pulls out a folder I haven't seen before, this one labeled NUCLAAROPT, IONUSEONL, YWHENNECESARY. Tomorrow, we remind them exactly who they're dealing with. The nuclear option folder contains documents I didn't even know existed. Original County Planning Commission meeting, minutes from 1985. Correspondence between the original Pine Ridge developer and county officials. Environmental impact studies. Zoning variance applications. And buried in the middle of it all, a single piece of paper that makes my heart stop. Dad, what is this? That, he says, pointing to a document labeled RESTRICETIV ECOVENANTP INER IDGEVA ELOPEME ENEAT is the smoking gun that's going to destroy their entire case. The document is dated March 15, 1986, a full year before we bought our property. It's signed by the original developer, county officials, and witnessed by 3 different legal entities. The language is dense, full of legal jargon I can barely understand, but Dad translates the key section for me. It says that any future homeowners association formed within Pine Ridge Development must receive written consent from at least 75% of all original property owners, Dad explains, his finger tracing the relevant paragraph. Not current owners. Original owners. The people who bought property when the development was first established. I stare at the document. How many original property owners are still here? 14 out of the original 23 properties. We've stayed in touch over the years, you know. Holiday cards, community barbecues, that kind of thing. And here's the beautiful part. The HOA never contacted any of us about this consent requirement. Dad pulls out another folder, this one containing a detailed spreadsheet with names, addresses, and contact information for every original Pine Ridge property owner, both current residents and those who have moved away. You've been tracking all of them? Son, I've been tracking property ownership changes in this development for 37 years. I know who lives where, who sold to whom, and exactly what legal standing everyone has. He taps the spreadsheet. I also know that Margaret Hendricks and her HOA board members all bought their properties within the last 5 years. They're not original owners, which means they had no legal authority to establish an HOA without our consent. This is bigger than just our cabin. If Dad is right and looking at his meticulous documentation, I'm starting to believe he always is, then the entire HOA is operating without legal foundation. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I needed to see exactly how far they'd push, Dad replies. If they'd been reasonable, if they'd approached us respectfully and tried to work within existing legal frameworks, I might have considered some kind of compromise. But they chose intimidation and legal threats instead. He opens his laptop. Yes, my 67-year-old disabled father is more technologically savvy than most people half his age and shows me a detailed email chain he's been conducting with the other original property owners. I reached out to all 14 remaining original owners 3 days ago, Dad says. Explained the situation, shared copies of the restrictive covenant, and asked a simple question: did anyone give written consent for HOA establishment? The responses are unanimous. Not one original property owner was contacted about HOA formation. Not one gave consent. Several, like us, received seizure notices for properties they've owned for decades. We're not the only ones fighting this, I realize. No, we're not. But we're the only ones with the legal documentation to prove the HOA has no standing to exist in the first place. Dad's strategy is brilliant and terrifying in its scope. Instead of just defending our property rights, he's preparing to challenge the HOA's right to exist at all. If he's successful, every fee they've collected, every rule they've enforced, every legal action they've taken will be null and void. There's more, Dad continues, pulling out yet another folder. Remember how I mentioned I used to work cases against Brookstone, Martinez, and Associates? I nod. I still have contacts at Morrison and Associates. Former colleagues who remember the Pine Ridge project, who have access to archived files, who are very interested in how their careful legal work from the 1980 CIS being misrepresented by a modern HOA. He shows me an email from David Morrison himself, the senior partner at Morrison and Associates. The subject line reads, Pine Ridge Development offering pro bono representation. Pro bono? I can barely believe what I'm reading. David remembers me, remembers the Pine Ridge project, and he's furious that someone is trying to circumvent the legal protections his firm built into those original deeds, Dad explains. He's offering to take our case for free, and he's bringing in 2 junior partners who specialize in property rights violations. This changes everything. Suddenly, we're not David fighting Goliath anymore. We're Goliath's older, smarter, more experienced brother who's been preparing for this fight for 37 years. But Dad, why didn't Morrison and Associates catch this HOA issue when it first started? Because the HOA filed their incorporation papers in a different county, claimed jurisdiction based on postal codes rather than legal property descriptions, and never properly notified any of the original property owners, Dad says. They essentially created a shadow legal entity with no actual authority, then used intimidation tactics to make it seem legitimate. That's fraud, isn't it? Dad's smile is genuinely frightening now. That's exactly what it is. And fraud, son, is a criminal matter, not just a civil one. He closes the laptop and looks at me directly. Tomorrow morning, David Morrison is filing a cease and desist order against the HOA demanding they halt all collection activities, pending a full legal review. By noon, we're filing a countersuit for harassment, fraud, and attempted theft of property through false legal claims. And if they don't back down, then we destroy them completely. Every fee gets returned with interest. Every board member faces personal liability for their role in the fraud. And Margaret Hendricks learns exactly why you should never threaten a family whose patriarch spent 3 decades studying property law. For the first time since this started, I'm not worried about losing our cabin. I'm starting to worry about what Dad's going to do to them when he wins. Are you ready for this? Dad asks. I look at my father, brilliant, methodical, absolutely relentless, surrounded by decades of careful preparation, and I realize the HOA never had a chance. The question isn't whether I'm ready, I tell him. The question is whether they are. The emergency HOA meeting is scheduled for Thursday evening at the Pine Ridge Community Center. Margaret Hendricks called it after receiving Morrison and Associates' cease and desist order, and the panic in her voice when she left Dad a voicemail was almost satisfying enough to end this whole thing right there. Almost. Dad insists on attending in person this time. I've been fighting this battle from behind the scenes long enough, he tells me as we load his wheelchair into the car. Time to show them exactly who they've been dealing with. The community center parking lot is packed. Word has spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a church social. Everyone wants to see how this plays out: the disabled man in the wheelchair versus the powerful HOA that's been terrorizing property owners for 2 years. Inside, the meeting room is standing room only. Margaret sits at the front table with 4 other board members and 2 men in expensive suits who can only be the lawyers from Brookstone, Martinez, and Associates. They're arranged like a tribunal, clearly expecting to intimidate us into submission one last time. That's their first mistake. Their second mistake is not recognizing David Morrison when he wheels Dad to the front of the room and takes a seat directly across from their legal team. Morrison is 73 years old, silver-haired, and radiates the kind of quiet confidence that comes from winning property law cases for 5 decades. Before we begin, Margaret announces, "I want to make it clear that this meeting is being recorded for legal purposes, and anything said here may be used in subsequent court proceedings." "Perfect," Dad replies, and his voice carries to every corner of the room without effort. "I was hoping you'd say that." Margaret's prepared statement is everything you'd expect: community standards, property values, legal obligations, fiscal responsibility. She presents their case like it's already been decided, like we're here to negotiate terms of surrender rather than challenge their authority. The Johnson family's refusal to pay lawful HOA fees has cost this community thousands of dollars in legal expenses, she concludes. We're prepared to offer one final settlement: payment of original fees plus 50% of our legal costs, or we proceed with foreclosure next week. The room is dead silent. I can feel dozens of eyes on us, waiting to see if the old man in the wheelchair will finally break under the pressure. Dad adjusts his position slightly, pulls out a single manila folder, and places it on the table between them. "Margaret, I have a question for you," he says conversationally. "When your HOA was established in 2023, did you obtain written consent from 75% of original Pine Ridge property owners?" "That's what kind of consent?" Margaret glances at her lawyers, and I can see the first crack in her confidence. "Written consent," Dad repeats, "as required by the restrictive covenant filed with this development in 1986. Section 4, subsection C. Would you like me to read it aloud?" One of the Brookstone lawyers leans forward. "Mr. Johnson, we've reviewed all relevant documentation. There are no outstanding consent requirements for HOA establishment." Dad turns to look at the lawyer directly. "You must be new at Brookstone. Are you familiar with County Planning Commission Resolution 8647? "Aye. What resolution?" "The one that approved Pine Ridge development contingent on specific restrictions regarding future homeowners associations." Dad opens his folder and removes a document. This resolution, signed by county commissioners and the original developer, which your firm should have discovered in any competent title search. Morrison speaks for the first time. "Your Honor," he says, addressing the room like a courtroom, "we'd like to enter County Planning Commission Resolution 8647 into the record, along with the attached restrictive covenant that Mr. Johnson referenced." "This isn't a courtroom," Margaret snaps. "You can't just enter things into the record." "You're right," Morrison replies smoothly. "This isn't a courtroom. But tomorrow morning, when we file criminal fraud charges against your HOA board, it will be." The room erupts. Neighbors turning to each other, asking questions, demanding explanations. Margaret is frantically whispering with her lawyers, who are frantically reading documents on their phones. Dad waits for quiet, then continues as if nothing happened. The room erupts. Neighbors turning to each other, asking questions, demanding explanations. Margaret is frantically whispering with her lawyers, who are frantically reading documents on their phones. Dad waits for quiet, then continues as if nothing happened. "I spent 37 years as a paralegal specializing in property law," he says. I wrote half the original deeds for Pine Ridge Development. I personally researched every legal restriction, every zoning requirement, every covenant that applies to this land. He looks directly at Margaret. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when someone tried to steal property I've been protecting since before you moved to the state? We're not stealing anything. Margaret's composure is cracking. We have legal authority. No, Dad interrupts, and his voice cuts through her protest like a blade. You have no authority. You never had authority. Your HOA was established without proper legal foundation, operates without legitimate jurisdiction, and has been collecting fees under false pretenses for 2 years. Morrison stands and addresses the room. Ladies and gentlemen, every fee collected by this HOA, every fine levied, every legal action taken, has been done without proper legal standing. We're prepared to pursue full restitution for all affected property owners. One of the Brookstone lawyers finally speaks up. This is a complex legal matter that requires careful review. No, Dad says firmly. This is fraud. And fraud is very simple. You claimed authority you didn't have. You collected money based on false legal claims. You threatened property seizure with no legal standing to do so. He turns his wheelchair to face the entire room. How many of you paid HOA fees because you were afraid of losing your homes? How many of you received threatening letters like the one they sent my family? Hands go up around the room. More than half the people present. That's criminal extortion, Morrison says quietly. And every board member who participated is personally liable. Margaret is pale now, clearly understanding for the first time that this isn't just about our cabin anymore. This is about the complete destruction of everything she's built over the past 2 years. We can negotiate, she starts. No, Dad interrupts one final time. You had your chance to negotiate when you taped that seizure notice to my cabin door. You chose intimidation and legal threats instead. Now you get to face the consequences. He closes his folder and looks up at her with the expression of a man who's been planning this moment for decades. Margaret, you picked the wrong family to threaten. But more importantly, you forgot the most basic rule of any fight. Make sure you actually have the legal right to be in the ring before you start throwing punches. The meeting dissolves into chaos as board members argue with lawyers. Neighbors demand explanations, and Morrison starts taking names of people interested in joining a class action lawsuit. But Dad just sits quietly in his wheelchair, watching 37 years of preparation pay off in the most spectacular way possible. Game over. The next 48 hours are a masterclass in what happens when fraud meets meticulous legal preparation. By Friday morning, Morrison and Associates has filed criminal complaints with the county prosecutor's office. By Friday afternoon, the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division has opened an investigation. By Saturday, Margaret Hendricks and 3 other board members have resigned for personal reasons. But they're not going quietly. This is harassment, Margaret shouts into her phone when I answer the call Saturday evening. Your father is destroying innocent people's lives over a property dispute. Margaret, you tried to steal our family cabin, I reply calmly. What did you think would happen? We're going to fight this, she continues, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. We have lawyers, we have resources, we have political connections. Your disabled father doesn't know who he's dealing with. I almost laugh. After everything that's happened, she still doesn't understand. Margaret, my disabled father spent 37 years preparing for exactly this conversation. He documented every property transaction in Pine Ridge Development since 1985. He maintained relationships with every original property owner. He kept detailed records of every legal precedent that might apply to HOA authority disputes. I paused to let that sink in. You want to know what he's doing right now? He's having dinner with County Commissioner Patricia Wells, one of the people who signed the original restrictive covenant you violated. They're old friends. She's very interested in how someone managed to circumvent county planning requirements without proper notification. The line goes quiet for a long moment. "This isn't over," Margaret finally says, but the fight has gone out of her voice. "Yes, it is," I tell her. "It was over the moment you taped that seizure notice to our door. You just didn't know it yet." She hangs up without another word. By Monday, the local newspaper runs a front-page story, HOA FRAUDIN VEASE TIGA a TINEXB a DSST a TEAE W IDE. Turns out, the same legal tactics Margaret's HOA used in Pine Ridge have been employed by HOAs across 3 counties, all using Brookstone, Martinez, and Associates as their legal representation. Dad reads the article aloud over breakfast, occasionally chuckling at particularly damning quotes from the prosecutor's office. "Listen to this," he says. "The scope of this alleged fraud scheme suggests a coordinated effort to establish illegitimate HOA authority over properties with existing legal protections against such associations. We expect criminal charges to be filed within the week." "How many properties are we talking about?" I ask. According to Morrison's preliminary research, at least 47 properties across Pine Ridge, Oak Valley, and Maple Heights developments. Dad folds the newspaper with satisfaction. 47 families who were being illegally threatened with property seizure. The financial numbers are staggering. The fraudulent HOAs collected over $300,000 in illegal fees over 2 years. Legal costs and penalties could reach into the millions. And that's before civil lawsuits from affected property owners. "Dad, they're going to lose everything, aren't they?" "Margaret Hendricks personally guaranteed the HOA's legal costs," Dad explains. "When you commit fraud using an illegitimate organization, you become personally liable for all damages. Her house, her savings, her retirement accounts, it's all fair game for restitution claims." But the most satisfying moment comes Wednesday afternoon when Brookstone, Martinez, and Associates sends a formal letter of apology along with a check for $15,000, full reimbursement of our legal costs, plus interest and penalties. "They're trying to avoid criminal liability," Morrison explains when he delivers the check personally. "The State Bar Association is opening an ethics investigation, and they're hoping cooperation will minimize the damage." "Will it work?" I ask. Morrison's smile is genuinely predatory. "Not even close. When lawyers participate in fraud, the Bar Association doesn't just revoke licenses, they pursue criminal charges. At least 3 attorneys at Brookstone are looking at potential jail time." But Margaret isn't finished. Thursday morning, she shows up at our house unannounced, looking haggard and desperate. I find her arguing with Dad on the front porch when I get home from work. "Please," she's saying, "there has to be some way to work this out. I'll pay back every fee. I'll dissolve the HOA. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't let them prosecute us." Dad listens patiently until she finishes, then responds with the measured tone of a man who's thought through every possible scenario. "Margaret, 3 weeks ago, you called my family freeloaders. You threatened to seize property, my disabled hands, built board by board. You dismissed my legal expertise because I'm in a wheelchair. You assumed I was helpless." He adjusts his position to look directly at her. "Now you want mercy from the man you tried to destroy. Where was your mercy when we begged you to review our documentation? Where was your willingness to work things out when we offered to show you the original restrictive covenants?" Margaret starts crying, actual tears running down her cheeks as she realizes the full scope of what she's lost. "I didn't know," she whispers. "I trusted our lawyers. I thought we had the right." You didn't want to know, Dad interrupts. You wanted to believe you had power over people you considered beneath you? You wanted to intimidate families into paying money they didn't owe because it made you feel important. He wheels his chair back slightly, creating distance between them. The prosecution is proceeding, Margaret. The restitution claims are being filed. The Bar Association investigation is moving forward, and every single person you threatened with illegal property seizure is going to get justice. Margaret looks at him with the expression of someone who's just realized they're standing in quicksand with no rope in sight. Why? She asks desperately. Why destroy all of us over $12,000? Dad's response is the most devastating thing I've ever heard him say. Because, Margaret, you forgot that disabled doesn't mean defenseless. And now, 37 years of preparation is going to teach you exactly what the difference means. She leaves without another word, and I never see her again. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the deck of our family cabin, watching Dad teach my 8-year-old daughter how to identify different types of legal documents. She's too young to understand property law, but she's old enough to understand that preparation matters, that knowledge is power, and that her grandfather is someone special. Grandpa, why do you keep all those papers in boxes? She asks, pointing to the filing cabinets we've moved to the cabin's back room. Because, sweetheart, information is like insurance, Dad explains, his voice gentle but serious. You hope you never need it, but when you do need it, you want to make sure you have exactly the right kind. The final legal settlements came through last week. Margaret Hendricks lost her house and most of her savings to restitution claims. 2 attorneys at Brookstone, Martinez and Associates were disbarred and face criminal fraud charges. The State Attorney General's office used our case as the foundation for new legislation protecting property owners from illegitimate HOA claims. But the most satisfying resolution came from an unexpected source. The county decided to honor Dad's decades of meticulous property research by offering him a part-time consulting position with the Planning Commission. At 67, with limited mobility, he's become the go-to expert for property rights disputes across 3 counties. They're paying me to do what I've been doing for free for 37 years, he told me with genuine amusement. Turns out, there's significant demand for someone who actually reads legal documents before making decisions. Our cabin is more secure now than it's ever been. Morrison and Associates helped us file additional protective covenants that make it virtually impossible for any future organization to claim authority over our property. We're not just protected, we're legally bulletproof. But the real victory is what I learned about my father during those terrifying weeks when it seemed like we might lose everything. I always knew Dad was smart. I knew he was tough. I knew he didn't let his disability define his capabilities. What I didn't know was that he'd spent 3 decades quietly preparing for a fight he hoped would never come. Studying law with the dedication of someone who understood that knowledge might be his family's only defense against people with more money and power. Why didn't you ever tell me about all this legal expertise? I asked him one evening while we were organizing his files. Because I hoped you'd never need to know, he replied simply. I hoped I was being paranoid, preparing for problems that would never materialize. But your grandfather taught me something important. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and never let anyone intimidate you just because they're louder or richer or more connected. The lessons from this experience go far beyond property law. Margaret and her HOA board assumed they could steamroll us because they saw a disabled man and his working-class family. They mistook quiet preparation for weakness, careful research for ignorance, and methodical thinking for inability to fight back. They learned, too late, that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones who don't look dangerous at all. Dad, what would have happened if you hadn't kept all those records? If you hadn't spent all those years studying property law? Dad considers this for a long moment, then gives me the answer I knew was coming but didn't want to hear. We would have lost everything. The cabin, the land, 37 years of family memories. We would have been forced to pay illegal fees or watch strangers auction off the property your mother loved, where her ashes are scattered, where you learned to be the man you became. The thought makes me physically sick, but it also makes me profoundly grateful. So what's the lesson here? I ask, though I think I already know. The lesson is that preparation beats intimidation every single time. Documentation beats loud voices. Knowledge beats arrogance. And patient, methodical people who everyone underestimates are often the ones who win when it really matters. He looks out over the lake, where he taught me to fish, where my daughter is now learning the same skills, where 4 generations of our family have made memories that no HOA or legal threat could ever take away. But the most important lesson is this: never let anyone make you feel powerless just because they have advantages you don't. They might have more money, better connections, fancier lawyers. But if you have truth and preparation on your side, if you're willing to do the work that other people are too lazy or arrogant to do, you can beat anyone. My daughter runs up to the deck, holding a legal document she found interesting. "Grandpa, what's this one say?" "That one, sweetheart, says that this cabin will belong to our family forever, and no one can ever take it away from us again." She nods solemnly, like this makes perfect sense, then runs back to explore the filing cabinets. If you're facing your own HOA nightmare, if someone with power and money is trying to intimidate you into giving up what's rightfully yours, remember this: preparation is power, documentation is defense, and the person everyone underestimates might just be the person who destroys you completely. Don't let them win. Fight back. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one sitting quietly in the wheelchair, surrounded by 37 years of careful preparation, waiting for the right moment to show you exactly what you're dealing with. Thanks for watching. Like this video if it reminded you that David really can beat Goliath when David has spent decades learning exactly where Goliath's weak spots are. Subscribe for more stories about preparation, perseverance, and the sweet taste of justice served cold. The HOA tried to seize my family's cabin, but they had no idea my disabled dad wrote the land deeds that would destroy their entire scheme. I'm standing here, staring at this bright yellow notice taped to our cabin door, and my hands won't stop shaking. NOTICEIOFPROPERTYSEIZUREFORUNPAIDAHOAFAES screams at me in bold black letters, like some kind of legal death sentence. This can't be real. This cabin has been in our family for 37 years. My dad built it with his own hands, board by board, nail by nail, even after the accident that left him in a wheelchair. Every summer of my childhood was spent here. Every family gathering, every holiday, every moment that mattered happened within these walls. And now some HOA that didn't even exist when we moved here thinks they can just take it? I pull out my phone with trembling fingers and call Dad. "They're trying to take the cabin," I whisper, because somehow saying it louder would make it more real. There's this long pause on the other end, and I can hear him breathing. Dad's always been the calm one, the problem solver, but this has to be too much, even for him. "Son," he says finally, and there's something in his voice I've never heard before. Not panic, not fear, but something else. Something almost amused. "Bring me that notice." And grab my old filing cabinet from the basement. The locked one. The locked filing cabinet. In 32 years of living in that house, I'd never seen inside it. Dad always said it was just old tax documents and boring paperwork. "Dad, this is serious. They're saying we owe $12,000 in back fees to an HOA we never signed up for. They're giving us 30 days. I know exactly how serious this is, Dad replies. And now I can definitely hear that strange tone. Trust me on this one. I've been waiting for something like this to happen. Waiting for it? What does that even mean? I rip the notice off the door and drive home faster than I should, my mind racing. How does an HOA just appear and claim authority over property that's been ours since before I was born? How do they have the legal right to seize anything? When I get home, Dad's already positioned his wheelchair by the kitchen table. He looks different somehow, more focused than I've seen him in years. The cabinet, he reminds me, and I head downstairs to get it. The thing weighs a ton, and by the time I wrestle it upstairs, I'm sweating and cursing. Dad produces a small silver key from his wallet, a key I've never seen before, and unlocks the cabinet. Inside are dozens of thick manila folders, each labeled with dates going back decades. Legal documents, property surveys, correspondence with county offices. This isn't random paperwork. This is a carefully organized archive. Dad, what is all this? He pulls out a folder labeled PINERIDGEDAVELOPMENTORIGINALDEEAs and REESAEAEACTA. Your old man wasn't always in this chair, you know. Before the accident, before the construction job went bad, I was a paralegal specializing in property law. Worked for Morrison and Associates downtown for 8 years. I stare at him. In all our conversations about his past, all the stories about his work before the accident, he'd never mentioned being a paralegal. I thought he was just a general laborer, someone who got hurt on a construction site and had to reinvent his life. I didn't just buy this land randomly, Dad continues, opening the folder with practiced precision. I researched every inch of it. I wrote half the original deeds for this entire development. I know exactly what rights we have, what restrictions exist, and what any future HOA can and cannot do. The papers he's spreading across the table look official, important, covered in legal language that makes my head spin. But Dad's eyes are sharp as he scans them, like he's reading a favorite book. They think they can intimidate us because they assume we're just regular homeowners who don't know our rights, he says. And for the first time since I saw that notice, I feel something other than panic. They have no idea who they're dealing with. I look at my father, really look at him, and realize I'm about to see a side of him I never knew existed. The HOA picked the wrong family to mess with, and they're about to find out exactly why. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Dad always remembers it was a Tuesday because that was the day he was supposed to get his promotion at Morrison and Associates. Instead, he spent 16 hours pinned under a collapsed scaffolding at a construction site where he was doing weekend-side work to save for my college fund. I was 12 then, and all I understood was that my strong, capable father, who could fix anything and knew everything, suddenly couldn't walk. What I didn't know was that lying in that hospital bed for 3 months, Dad made a decision that would save our family decades later. He decided to become the most knowledgeable property law expert outside of a courthouse. The doctor said I'd never work in an office again, Dad tells me now, his fingers tracing the edges of legal documents like old friends. Said the pain would be too much, the mobility issues too complicated. But they didn't understand something: when you lose the use of your legs, your mind becomes everything. He pulls out another folder, this one thick with correspondence from county clerks, surveyors, and legal offices. I spent 2 years learning every property law in this county. Every ordinance, every restriction, every loophole. I figured if I was going to be stuck in this chair, I was going to make sure nobody could ever take advantage of my family because of it. The cabin represented more than just property to Dad. It was proof that his disability couldn't stop him from providing for us. He'd researched 12 different plots of land before settling on the 5 acres in Pine Ridge. Not because it was the cheapest or the prettiest, but because he'd studied the legal framework so thoroughly, he knew exactly what protections it offered. I didn't just buy land, son. I bought legal immunity. Those summers at the cabin weren't just family time. They were Dad teaching me life lessons I didn't even realize I was learning. How to solve problems methodically. How to research before making decisions. How to never let anyone intimidate you just because they speak louder or wear better suits. You remember that summer when you were 16 and wanted to build that treehouse? Dad asks, and I nod. I made you get permits from the county, research property line setbacks, check for utility easements. You thought I was being ridiculous. I had thought he was being ridiculous. All my friends just built tree houses wherever they wanted. But Dad insisted we do everything properly, legally, with documentation. That's when I taught you the most important lesson about property ownership, he continues. Documentation beats intimidation every single time. People will try to scare you, threaten you, make you think you don't have rights. But if you have the paperwork, you have the power. The HOA that's trying to seize our cabin formed just 2 years ago. A group of newer residents who moved into the subdivision after it was fully developed, people who wanted to improve property values and maintain community standards. They started small, complaining about overgrown lawns, demanding people paint their mailboxes certain colors. But then they got ambitious. They filed paperwork claiming authority over all properties in the original Pine Ridge development, including ours. They began assessing fees retroactively, claiming that all properties owed dues from the moment the HOA was established, regardless of whether owners had agreed to join. Most of our neighbors just paid the fees. It was easier than fighting, and $12,000 spread over several years wasn't worth the legal hassle. But our cabin isn't just an investment property or a weekend getaway. It's where Mom's ashes are scattered in the garden Dad planted for her. It's where I proposed to my wife. It's where my kids took their first steps on the deck Dad built despite his disability. They're counting on us being scared, Dad says, organizing the documents into neat piles. They're counting on us not knowing our rights. They're counting on us seeing this wheelchair and assuming I'm helpless. He looks up at me, and I see the same determination that got him through months of physical therapy, years of relearning how to live, decades of proving that his worth wasn't measured by his mobility. What they don't realize is that I've been preparing for this fight since the day I bought this land. Every document in this cabinet, every piece of correspondence, every legal precedent I've researched it, was all leading to this moment. The stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't just about $12,000 in HOA fees. This is about whether a group of newcomers can retroactively claim control over property that's been in our family since before they even knew this place existed. This is about whether my disabled father's careful, methodical preparation will be enough to protect everything he's built. Tomorrow, we fight back, Dad says, closing the folder with finality. And son, we're going to win. I believe him. For the first time since I saw that yellow notice, I actually believe him. The Pine Ridge HOA operates out of a strip mall office between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. Real professional. I'm walking through the door at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, clutching a folder of documents Dad selected for this first meeting. He wanted to come with me, but we agreed that showing up with a man in a wheelchair might make them underestimate us even more than they already do. The receptionist barely looks up from her phone. Help you? I need to speak with someone about this seizure notice, I say, placing the yellow paper on her desk. My family received it yesterday. She glances at it with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. Oh, the Pine Ridge cabin. Yeah, that's been a problem property. Let me get Margaret. A problem property. Our family legacy is a problem property. Margaret Hendricks emerges from the back office like she owns the world. Mid-50s, perfectly styled gray hair, wearing a business suit that probably costs more than most people's monthly rent. She has that specific kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no by anyone who matters. "You must be here about the cabin," she says, not offering to shake hands. "I'm Margaret Hendricks, HOA board president. I assume you're here to discuss payment arrangements for the outstanding fees." "I'm here to discuss why you think you have any authority over property my family has owned for 37 years, I reply, keeping my voice level. Dad taught me that the first person to raise their voice in a legal discussion is usually the first person to lose. Margaret's smile doesn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Johnson, my father is Robert Johnson, the property owner. Mr. Johnson, I understand this might be confusing for you, but when your father purchased that property, it was part of the Pine Ridge development. All properties in this development are subject to HOA authority, regardless of when they were purchased or whether previous owners chose to participate." She says this like she's explaining basic math to a child. Like it's so obvious that questioning it makes me look stupid. "The HOA was established 2 years ago," I point out. "Our cabin has been there since 1987. "Yes? Well, that's actually part of the problem," Margaret continues, settling behind her desk like a judge taking the bench. "Your family has been, let's say, freeloading off the community improvements, funded by responsible homeowners for decades. The landscaping at the development entrance, the road maintenance, the community standards that maintain everyone's property values, these things cost money. Freeloading. She just called my disabled father, who built that cabin with his own hands after losing the use of his legs, a freeloader. My father has been paying county taxes on that property for 37 years, I say, and I can hear my voice getting tighter despite my best efforts. He's never used any community services because there weren't any community services when he built there." "That's irrelevant," Margaret waves dismissively. "The legal framework is clear. All properties in Pine Ridge development fall under HOA jurisdiction. Your father should have done his research before buying there." Oh, if only she knew exactly how much research Dad had done. I open my folder and pull out the first document, a copy of our original deed. Actually, I think there might be some confusion about the legal framework. This is our property deed from 1987. Could you show me exactly where it mentions any HOA obligations? Margaret doesn't even look at the document. "Mr. Johnson, I don't need to review your paperwork. Our legal team has already confirmed our authority over all Pine Ridge properties. The seizure notice stands unless payment is made within 30 days. Your legal team, I repeat. And who exactly is your legal team? Brookstone, Martinez and Associates. They specialize in HOA law." She says this like she's playing a trump card. Like dropping a law firm name should make me crawl away in defeat. I nod thoughtfully, then pull out the second document. Dad gave me a business card from 1986. Interesting. My father used to work for Morrison and Associates. They handled all the original property law for Pine Ridge development. Maybe your legal team should give them a call. For the first time, Margaret actually looks at something I've put in front of her. The business card is yellowed with age, but the text is clear: Robert Johnson, Paralegal Specialist Property and Development Law. Your father was a paralegal? There's the first crack in her confidence. My father wrote half the original deeds for this development, I say quietly. Including ours. Including the legal restrictions on any future homeowners associations. Margaret stares at the business card for a long moment, then looks back up at me. But instead of the concern I expected to see, her expression hardens. "Mr. Johnson, I don't care if your father was Clarence Darrow himself. The law is the law. HOA authority supersedes individual property rights when community standards are at stake. Your family owes $12,000 in back fees, plus interest. Pay it, or we'll take the property through legal seizure. She stands up, clearly ending the meeting. You have 28 days remaining. I gather my documents slowly, making sure she sees me taking my time. You know what's interesting about legal seizures, Margaret? They only work when the seizing party actually has legal standing. But I guess your expensive legal team already explained that to you. I'm walking toward the door when she calls after me. Mr. Johnson? Your father should have thought about legal standing before he decided to ignore community responsibilities for almost 4 decades. I stop and turn back to her. My father thinks about legal standing every single day, has for 37 years. That's what makes this so interesting. The door closes behind me with a soft click, but I can feel Margaret watching me through the window as I walk to my car. She's not as confident as she was 10 minutes ago, but she's not backing down either. When I call Dad from the parking lot, he listens to my recap without interrupting. So she mentioned Brookstone Martinez and Associates? He asks when I finish. You know them? Dad chuckles, and there's that strange amusement in his voice again. Oh, I know them very well. Used to work cases against them back in the day. They're good at intimidating people who don't know better. But they have one major weakness. What's that? They assume everyone else is as lazy with their research as they are. Tomorrow, we escalate. The escalation comes in the form of a certified letter 3 days later. Not just one letter, 3 separate envelopes, all requiring signatures, all from Brookstone, Martinez and Associates. The legal letterhead is impressive, the language intimidating, and the message crystal clear: pay immediately or face foreclosure proceedings within 14 days. Foreclosure. I'm pacing around Dad's kitchen table while he reads through each letter methodically. They're talking about foreclosure after one conversation? It's a pressure tactic, Dad says calmly, but I can see his jaw tightening as he reads. They're trying to scare us into paying before we have time to mount a proper defense.